states, governments, privatize themselves to death. That's the critical thing. A new institutional system was created in which everything was left to the markets, and that was a political project, not an economic necessity. Moreover, this system is operated also by people, by what people call bankers, but it's much more complicated. It's financial consultants, it's financial consultants, it's financial analysts, traders, all kind of people populate this wall of the global financial market that control everything in the planet. These people are people who, in addition to the logic of maximizing profit, speculating, etc., they have their personal interests. They work on their quarterly bonuses, and they don't care what happens afterwards. Take the money and run. And if the company goes belly up, and the financial stock goes belly up, they have billionaire indemnities that allow them to keep going on from one place to another, from one country to another, from one market to another. So, again, these are also people. Moreover, the logic of the global financial markets is run by an ideology. The ideology, I call it market fundamentalism. Meaning that the market is self-correcting, that the market can do everything by itself. And any attempt to regulate the market goes against some basic nature, which is the market as the most efficient form of economic and social organization. Well, it's simply empirically false. And in fact, it's so empirically false that many years ago, in 2000, with a group of colleagues, some of them very well known, Will Hutton, Tony Giddens, Paul Volcker, George Soros, we published a book in 2000. The title of the book was On the Edge in 2000, in which I wrote a chapter on how information technology and the automation of trading and securitization of everything using powerful mathematical models was creating a system that was unsustainable because it was feeding itself on creating debt, expanding debt. The system works by selling debt and using the debt to create new debts on the basis of splicing securities of the insurance company that were supposed to actually secure the production of this debt. So, at one point, the market did not rectify itself, did not control itself. The market went off control through the process of what now is called the subprime lending, connected mainly to real estate businesses. But this subprime lending is not an accident. It was designed also to maximize the exposure of people who would have to keep repaying and repaying so that the profit of the financial system would increase dramatically. I can give you just one illustrative figure. I'm not going to talk the statistics here today, but just one interesting figure. The paradox, for instance, in the United States, is that this financial crisis and the collapse of the economy took place at the moment of the greatest increase of productivity linked to the new economy and to the information technology revolution in business and in the economy at large. During the period of 1998-2008, 10 years before the crisis, productivity in the United States grew in cumulative terms at 30%. 30% more productive the economy in these 10 years. But at the same time, the real wages declined by 3% overall, and particularly for college-educated graduates. At the same period, the financial industry increased its share of profits from 20% to 40%. In other words, all the bonuses of productivity went into the financial sector, not into the rest of the creative productive economy. And the financial sector used this tremendous level of profits to create more capital, invent more capital, so to the point that today say for one euro or dollar or pound in the world that exists, produced in the economy, there are 50 pounds created as virtual capital. The ratio between what we produce and what we trade in the financial market is 1 to 50. It was 1 to 10, 20 years ago. In other words, we have virtualized this capital system. It's much more than capital. It's fictitious capital. It's fictitious value. It's virtualized capital, unregulated and fed only by the constant lending and relending, borrowing and borrowing, until the system went out of control. We know the story. If you don't know exactly the details, look for two great movies, Inside Job and Too Big to Fail, which tell you the story much better than any university lecture can tell you. By the way, by very good people, very solid people, PhDs from Berkeley, etc., etc. Watch these movies, and the whole story is there. But then, what then happened is that this famous government that should stay away from the markets was immediately called to the rescue and to save the financial system. And I say the financial system, not the banks, because in fact, 80% of the lending is not from the banks, it's from financial institutions. And therefore the system is much more complicated. So governments came to the rescue at the price of trillions of dollars taken from where? From our pockets. That's the point. So we save the banks, okay? God save the Queen, but we save the banks. So after that, what happened, as you know, the simple logic of the process, that as soon as the banks were refloated, the banks are doing okay, thanks, and in many countries. Not in all, not in Europe, not in Spain, for instance, and not in England, as the Royal Bank of Scotland, for instance. So after that, credit was immediately curtailed to the real economy, and particularly to small and medium businesses that create about 2/3 of the jobs. And therefore, without credit, companies stop working, stop hiring. Then people suddenly, on the one hand, they lost jobs, they lost wages, and they had to repay the mortgages. In some countries, like in Spain, they simply not only could not pay the mortgage and would lose their homes, but they still had to repay the rest of their life the loan they got. So in the United States, for instance, if you lose, you cannot pay your mortgage, they take away your home. In Spain, they take away your home, but you still have to pay forever, even your funeral. So because of that, there was, from the financial crisis, we went into a crisis of the industry, and from there into a crisis of employment, and therefore, ultimately, governments had to, on the one hand, cover all these new needs that were increasing, on the other hand, assume the debts of the banks, on the other hand, they had less revenue for obvious reasons, because they had people needed to spend, government could not recover taxes, etc., etc. So ultimately, what was a financial crisis metamorphosed itself into an industrial crisis, into an employment crisis, ultimately into a fiscal crisis, meaning government did not have enough money to cover all the obligations they had to assume. That moment is when the financial crisis metamorphosed itself into a new form of crisis, a social crisis, meaning that government stopped social spending to a large extent and tried to save the situation by cutting off public jobs and public services rather than taxing the banks, regulating the banks, taxing the high-income groups, and moreover, stopping what could be the sources of recovering the economy at two levels. In the short term, instead of putting in more money into the economy, taking money out of the economy, cutting spending. Now, it's like someone who is almost dead then you take out the blood transfusion. You stop the machine of reactivating the person who is trying to fight for life. The key issue now is not so much fiscal balance. The key issue is to reactivate the economy, at least within the capitalist logic. I will come in a second to other forms of logic. Second, everybody agrees that in the midterm, the only way to reactivate the economy, not in terms of spending, cutting spending, stimulus, using public money so beyond the debate between neoclassical equilibrium and austerity and stimuli through a neo-Keynesian policy, beyond that, there's a more fundamental thing. Reactivating the economy through innovation, through knowledge economy, through the ability to create new forms of the productivity, creating real value. This is directly connected to the knowledge economy, to research, to innovation, to education. What governments are doing are cutting university funding, are undoing education. They are cutting research funding. So, on the one hand, there is an attempt to create a fiscal balance by not spending, therefore not activating the economy in the short term, and cutting off the roots of innovation, productivity, and knowledge development that could reactivate the economy in the midterm. Why? They're not that stupid. Well, they are. Because they think they can get away with all this. Who are they? There is a triangle of power in our societies. A triangle doesn't mean a power elite, doesn't mean a unified elite. It means three particular segments of dominant elites that have a set of interlocking networks which vary, which change, but that together close all the other exits. One is the financial system, with actual people who benefit and control the decision-making of letting the markets decide, but with them in the helm of reaping the profits of these movements of the market, first of all. Second, the media, the corporate media, which on the one hand that are owned by the financial networks, and then the media own the politicians. You have some guy around here named Merton, no? Some little connection with Cameron and other people, but he had also excellent relationship with Blair. So this is beyond politics. And then third, the political class as a whole. Now, not let me wrong. Not all parties are the same, but all together defend one particular system. It's called democracy, and it is democracy, but it's a restrained form of democracy, meaning you create rules of the game, you make sure that no one goes out of the rules of the game, and then you negotiate and share power within the political class and within this particular system. And yes, of course, you can vote for other parties, sure, as the Liberal Democrats in Britain, for instance, and I'm not talking about the Revolutionary Party. The rules of the game are determined by those who, at the moment of establishing the rules of the game, have enough